Chapter 1291. Qin Amlin just watched like that, his gaze landing on her. The young man put his hand on her shoulder. Then, he carried the child with one hand and hugged her with the other. The family of three looked happy and harmonious. It was true. Very good. Qin Amlin chuckled. She was really good. She was living a good life. It turned out that she was willing to retire from the entertainment industry because she wanted to live a peaceful life. It was good. Qin Amlin lowered his eyes. After a while, he opened them again and met her eyes. She was on the ladder over there, and he was here. Their bodies passed each other, and then they gradually drifted apart. Qin Amlin didn't greet her. He just looked at her coldly. Yi Liangxiu did the same. From the day they broke up, they didn't need to be polite to each other anymore. However, at this moment, he felt a sense of anger from being deceived. She already had someone else. Why did she pretend to be sad and angry about Su Cheng's matter? Just as their eyes met, there was too much pain in his eyes that she couldn't understand. Even he couldn't understand. It was deeply engraved in his heart. Dr. Lin also saw him and asked Yi Liangxiu in a low voice, "Do you need to say hello?" She didn't feel comfortable at first, so she didn't reject him when he carried her. However, in the man's eyes, there was a hint of warmth. Dr. Lin knew that man. He was Qin Amlin, the president of King Entertainment. Mu Yun was his son. Dr. Lin carefully pressed Mu Yun's face against the side of her neck so that Qin Amlin couldn't see it. It was up to Yi Liangxiu to say it or not. Yi Liangxiu pursed her lips and looked up at Dr. Lin. After a while, she said softly, "Let's go." So, they walked side by side slowly and passed by Qin Amlin. Some things, once missed once, would be missed forever. She couldn't tell if she had any expectations for him after that, but she knew that after seeing those photos of Su Cheng, she decided not to, because she couldn't stand the thought of another woman appearing by his side at any time. She wanted love to be single-minded, not to say that he was charity, she and others to share. Gradually, they went further and further away. Qin Amlin arrived at the underground parking lot and felt that the lights in the parking lot were particularly dim today. It wasn't until he sat in the car and old Zhang spoke to him that he came back to his senses. "I just bumped into someone I know." Although it was the middle of the night, old Zhang was still in high spirits. "Young master, I saw Miss Yi just now, and she even brought a child. Looking at this child, I'm afraid Miss Yi has already hidden her marriage." Qin Amlin pursed his thin lips and scolded, "You talk too much." Old Zhang didn't dare to continue. He shut up and drove. However, Qin Amlin felt as if a stone had been thrown into his heart, and he couldn't calm down for a long time. Moreover, there was a fishy sweetness in his mouth, and he swallowed it. Old Zhang drove the car to the destination, and Qin Amlin came out 2 hours after the appointment. When he came out, it was already 1 o'clock at night. His original plan was to return to New York immediately, but he changed his mind while sitting in the car. He called Yi Liangxiu's phone. "Are you free? Let's have a cup of coffee together?" On the other side, Yi Liangxiu was still awake. She had just settled Mu Yun, and Dr. Lin was still there. She looked at Dr. Lin and covered the phone. "Qin Amlin." She didn't cover it tightly, and Qin Amlin heard. "A man. Was it that man?" Chapter 1292. A man's instinct told him that the person talking to her was a man, and it was the man he had seen earlier today. He chuckled. "Forget it if it's not convenient." "There's nothing inconvenient about it," Yi Liangxiu said quickly and asked for the address. Dr. Lin watched her take the car keys and said worriedly, "I'll drive you." Yi Liangxiu shook her head and refused. "No need. I'll drive myself." She paused. "Don't go back tonight. Sleep in the guest room." She had known Dr. Lin for a long time, and he would sleep here occasionally because of Mu Yun, so there was nothing wrong with it. Dr. Lin nodded. Before she left, he suddenly patted her shoulder. "Call me if you need anything." Yi Liangxiu smiled at him and turned to leave. Dr. Lin looked at her back and chuckled. This was the most beautiful Yi Liangxiu he had ever seen, the most authentic Yi Liangxiu. Qin Amlin was meeting Yi Liangxiu in a private capacity. By the time she arrived at the cafe, it was already late at night. The coffee he ordered was already cold. Fortunately, the weather was hot, so it wasn't cold. Yi Lianqiu took a small sip and said faintly, "Do you want to catch up, Chief Qin?" They hadn't seen each other for a year. It wasn't because she didn't appear at King Entertainment, but because he wasn't in B City. Although she wasn't around, there were always people who would tell her about the gossip. For example, Su Cheng. Su Cheng said that Qin Amlin had another woman outside. Su Cheng said that Qin Amlin only returned to B City once in a while. But these were all things that Su Cheng had said, and Yi Lianqiu had never been at ease. Now that she was sitting face to face with him, she felt like she was in a trance. "Are you all right?" He took a sip of coffee and put down the cup in his hand, asking her calmly. Yi Lianqiu didn't drink. She just rubbed the cup with her fingers. Her stomach wasn't good, so she couldn't drink anything cold. If she did, her stomach would hurt. However, he did not know. Or maybe he knew but didn't care. She remembered that she had reminded him before. "Pretty good. What about you?" Qin Amlin didn't answer her question directly. Instead, he continued softly. "Have you been together for a long time? How old is the child?" Yi Lianqiu's fingers paused. She understood that he was asking about Dr. Lin and Mu Yun. Lowering his eyes, he said, "Yeah, we got together a few years ago. The child is 4.5 years old now." She was 1 year off. Qin Amlin's expression changed. He suddenly leaned forward and moved closer. He looked at her brows and asked through gritted teeth, "You clearly have a man. Why did you still sleep with me that time?" That time? That time? Yi Lianqiu held the cup with her fingers and her smile faded. "At that time, I wasn't with him yet. Furthermore, it was so long ago. There's no need for President Qin to bring it up again." "No need?" Qin Amlin repeated himself. After staying silent for a long time, he said, "Yi Lianqiu, I'm married." "What?" She raised her eyes and looked at him. Her pupils contracted violently, and her fingers that were holding the cup trembled slightly. She thought that she wouldn't be surprised by such news. Su Cheng had told her many times that Qin Amlin was with someone else, and it was true love. "True love? Is it Peiqiqi?" Yi Lianqiu asked softly. Chapter 1293. She's Tang Yu's wife. Isn't she afraid of retribution? She stared at his eyes, not letting go of his expression. Qin Amlin smiled faintly. "She has forgotten everything. She only remembers me now." Yi Lianqiu lowered her eyes, her long eyelashes trembling. "She doesn't love you, does she?" "But I love her." Qin Amlin smiled bitterly. "When I'm with her, it's like returning to—" He didn't finish his sentence and suddenly paused. But Yi Lianqiu caught his hesitation. She looked at him and asked word by word, "It's like returning to the time when I was your sleeping pill and pillow, right?" She looked at him. "Qin Amlin, do you need this feeling, or does she need it? Have you really loved her? Or anyone else? Have you ever thought about her willingness?" She asked him back with a little agitation. After asking, she drank a cup of coffee. It was so cold that her heart was about to freeze. Qin Amlin pursed his lips. "Yi Lianqiu, she is different from you." She raised her chin. "What's different about her? Is it because you love her more than usual?" Suddenly, for some reason, Qin Amlin said, "I have never had sex with her." Very pure. A very touching fairy tale. Yi Lianqiu smiled coldly. "And President Qin doesn't need to tell me about this." She got up and walked to the entrance of the cafe. She cried because she didn't expect him to say this to her. He said that he loved someone else and was willing to be with her even if they didn't have sex. Yi Lianqiu wiped her tears. She laughed at herself. She laughed at herself. She laughed at how she had never been anything in his heart. She actually came to see him so late at night. There was still a glimmer of hope in her heart. She hoped that he could say that what Su Cheng said was not true. It turned out that it was all true. Just as she was full of coffee, an arm caught her. She was dragged into a deserted passageway. It was dimly lit, and there was no one there. There was only the dark night, Yi Lianqiu, and Qin Amlin in front of her. "You are married," she whispered, looking up at him. Her eyes were watery, dazzling and dazzling in such a night. Her beauty was so dazzling that it made one's heart ache. "Yes." His voice was deep. In fact, Qin Amlin didn't know how to express himself to her. Only he knew in his heart that in the past year, it might not have been because he wanted to fulfill Chi-Chi's wish, which was why he didn't force himself to have sex with her. In fact, in his heart, he was somewhat resistant. He actually resisted having sex with the woman he liked. Even he himself felt that it was inconceivable. But he really, really liked her. This could not be doubted. However, when he was facing Yi Lianxiu, he had an even deeper impulse. The pure bestiality of a man wanted to explode on her. Moreover, she was wrong. Sleeping with Pei Chi-Chi made his sleep worse. Pei Chi-Chi wasn't his sleeping pill, nor was she his pillow. They were more like a fake couple who shared a strange bed. However, he still stubbornly refused to give up. Even when he saw Yi Lianxiu's family of 3, he directly told her that he was married. Her reaction was beyond his expectations. His body trapped her between his arms and the narrow wall. If he lowered his head, he would be able to see her eyes. Chapter 1294. Her body trembled lightly as she looked up at him. She didn't avoid his gaze. "Qin Anlin, I'm not unhappy, nor am I happy." She smiled. "Have you forgotten? We're strangers who have nothing to do with each other." He had long forgotten that she used to be in his kitchen, wearing his shirt, making breakfast for him, making lunch for him, and making the bed for him. He would sit on the bed and pat the spot next to him, asking her to sleep with him. At that time, it was as if he was summoning a puppy beside him. God knew that she hated being treated as a pet the most. But at that time, she felt very happy. He was the one who didn't want her. Why did he have to tease her now, after he had someone else? Her smile deepened as she looked at him. "I have no reason to be unhappy. I've been married for a long time." "You've been married for a long time?" He looked at her. "Do you have a child after marriage?" "No matter before or after marriage. It won't be President Qin's child." She sneered. "Don't tell me that President Qin made me take the morning after pill after that time with me?" She looked at him and smiled. "Do you want me to explain the meaning of the morning after pill to you?" "Don't say it." His voice was very soft, and his body slowly let go of her. He closed his eyes slightly as if he was thinking of the past. Compared to the life he had with Yi Lianxiu in the past, his life with Pei Chi-Chi was more like that of a brother and sister. It was very safe. Even if Pei Chi-Chi took off her clothes and stood in front of him now, he could still bear it. In the past, when he was with Yi Lianxiu, he had to repeatedly emphasize to himself that it was safe for her to do so. In the end, he was the one who violated the taboo, but he forced her to promise herself that she wouldn't cross the line again. She hated him, and there was a reason for that. Qin Anlin let go of her and slowly took 2 steps back. His voice was low. "You're living well now. It's the right decision for us to separate." With that, he gave her a deep look. That one glance had allowed her to understand many things. He turned and left, disappearing into the boundless dark night. Yi Lianxiu raised her hand and covered her mouth. She tried her best to hold it in and looked at his back. "Qin Anlin, you idiot. You don't even know who you love. Actually, you fell in love with me a long time ago, but you always stubbornly told yourself that you can't have feelings for goods. You fool, poor thing. You live with someone else, and you don't force her. Is it really because of love? If he didn't love her, he wouldn't force her. Fool, fool. Was it really good to waste time like this? Fool, I hate you." She sobbed and slowly squatted down. Between the cracks in the wall, it began to drizzle. She didn't care and just squatted there and cried. She hated him. She hated how easily he got together with someone else. Had he ever asked her if she was willing? Had he ever given her a chance? Never. A figure stood in front of her, his voice gentle. "You're already so old, yet you're still crying." She suddenly raised her eyes and looked at the person in front of her in confusion. "All right, don't cry anymore. Go wash your face." He pulled her up and reached out to gently wipe her tears. "It's a little cold outside. Go wash up. I'll go in and order a cup of hot coffee for you." Yi Lianxiu closed her eyes. Her fingers rested gently on his waist, and her face rested on his shoulder. "Xing Yuan, thank you." At this moment, she needed some comfort. She needed a shoulder to lean on. Chapter 1295. He watched her and her husband hug each other. She was so soft in the arms of another man, and his heart ached slightly once. She belonged to him. She used to be like this, crying in his arms and smiling in his arms. She also used to call him Amlin and be with him from dawn to dawn. Qin Amlin watched quietly, watched them embrace each other, watched her cry in someone else's arms. At that moment, Qin Amlin heard the sound of his heart breaking, but he didn't know if it was hers or his. He didn't know how long he watched, but he saw her sit in the cafe again. The man helped her order coffee and personally delivered it to her. He sat beside her and even placed his fingers on the back of her hand. She didn't refuse. Yes, how could she refuse? She and that person were together from the start. Qin Amlin pursed his lips. As he watched, he felt that it was meaningless. It was him, not her first. He slowly backed away and finally left. When he sat in the car, old Zhang asked softly, "Young master, are we going to the airport?" The private plane was already prepared, and the young master had been delayed for a long time. Qin Amlin pursed his lips. After a long while, he gave a faint grunt of agreement. Old Zhang immediately started the car and said, "Did you see Miss Yi just now?" Other than Kaim, old Zhang was probably the only one who knew the best about the relationship between Qin Amlin and Yi Liangxiu. Although it wasn't said explicitly, old Zhang knew that Yi Liangxiu and his young master had lived together. At first, he thought that his young master had made up his mind because he really didn't have any women during that period of time. However, he didn't expect that such a beautiful girl like Miss Yi couldn't keep his young master's heart. In the end, it was still over. He saw that Miss Yi was with someone else. Old Zhang didn't know about Pei Chi-Chi. At this moment, he looked at his young master's face and thought to himself, "Young master must be touched. You didn't take the little girl seriously in the past, but now she doesn't want to kiss you. Are you upset?" Qin Amlin didn't speak along the way. Lao Zhang couldn't help but say, "Young master, if you really like it, as long as the man and woman are unmarried, it's not impossible." He spoke for a long time, but there was no response. Thus, old Zhang muttered again, "Actually, men and women are just like that. What does Miss Yi have with others? It's fine. Isn't young master also?" What he said after that was not very pleasant to hear. Qin Amlin knew what Lao Zhang wanted to say without listening. He opened his half-closed eyes and glared at Lao Zhang. Old Zhang did not dare to make another sound. He seemed to have said something terrible, probably that the young master couldn't accept Miss Yi belonging to someone else. But he was the one who didn't want the young lady. She was the best actress, so how could she wait for him? Dream on. Old Zhang shut up, but Qin Amlin's heart didn't calm down. As long as he closed his eyes, his mind would be filled with the scene of Yi Liangxiu throwing herself into Lin Xingyuan's arms. She had acted in a lot of love scenes. Many of them were about her throwing herself into someone's arms, and there were even real kissing scenes. However, no matter how real those scenes were, they were still acting. This time it was real in front of him. That kind of shocked him. Qin Amlin's lips tightened. When they reached the airport, he got out of the car and told old Zhang, "Don't talk too much, especially in front of old madam. Do you hear me?" Chapter 1296. Qin Amlin looked at him again and didn't say anything. He boarded the private plane. In the cafe, Yi Liangxiu held a cup of hot coffee and sipped it lightly. However, her body was still cold because the cup of hot coffee couldn't warm her body up. "Are you feeling better?" Lin Xingyuan's voice was gentle. He reached out to hold her hand and said, "If you're feeling better, go home. Mu Yun is still waiting for you." Yi Liangxiu looked up at him and said in a low voice, "Lin Xingyun, I don't want to have another child." He looked at her for a long time before he picked up his cup of coffee. "Are you sure?" "Yes." She smiled lightly. "Xingyuan, I'm immortal after all. I can't do it." Lin Xingyuan didn't ask too much. He just smiled and said, "It's good that you've thought it through. It's just that Mu Yin will have to work a little harder." Yi Liangxiu looked down and said, "I'll be with him." Lin Xingyuan finished a cup of coffee and picked up the car key. "Let's go. I'll take you home." She looked up and looked into his eyes. She said softly, "He's married." "I know." He still smiled gently, held her hand, and walked out. It was late at night, and the dew was cold. This time, she didn't break away from his hand. She just let him hold her hand. At this moment, what he gave her was not comfort, but peace. Lin Xingyuan sent her home, but he didn't stay. Instead, he drove back. Yi Lianxiu stood by the car. Xingyuan, you call me when you get home. He sat in the car and looked at her with burning eyes. Yi Lianxiu, are you willing to try with me? He put his slender and good-looking fingers on the steering wheel and smiled gently at her. Yi Lianxiu, I'm just a doctor with an annual salary of 500,000. Are you sure? He wasn't just talking about money, he was also talking about fame and status. Lin Xingyuan was born into a family of doctors. Adding on his ancestral property, it was enough for her to have 5 children, all of whom could be fed until they were fat and plump. But fame and status he could not give her. She was the most dazzling star in the film industry. He couldn't give her that kind of status. So, he still had to ask her again because he didn't want her to regret it. They were no longer impulsive children. Yi Lianxiu put her hands behind her back. She shook her head and then nodded at him. She acted like a 10-year-old girl who didn't know what to do or was frightened. Actually, she had never been in love before. Lin Xingyuan sighed. Lianxiu, tell me, are you willing? I don't lack money, and I think the days of being frozen are pretty good, she said briskly. Lin Xingyuan smiled. She understood him and what he meant. He didn't say too much and didn't ask her further. He just said goodbye and drove out of her villa. Lin Xingyuan felt that he was taking advantage of her, but he thought that if he didn't do this, he would regret it in the future. Yi Lianxiu looked at him in the moonlight for a while, then entered the main hall and slowly went upstairs. There were only 2 or 3 servants in this villa, and they were all used to it. Late at night, she walked into the children's room on the 2nd floor. Mu Yun was awake. The little boy sat on the bed and watched his mother come in. He asked softly, Mom, are you going to be with Uncle Lin? Chapter 1297. Yi Muyun's little face was a little tense. After sitting for a while, he said, I saw Dad. Yi Lianxiu was a little confused. She had never told Mu Yun about Qin Anlin. How could Mu Yun recognize him? Yi Muyun's voice was very soft. I saw him at the airport. He looked at Mom, and Mom looked at him. Yi Lianxiu didn't know how to explain to her son. After a long silence, she said, But Mom can't take Mu Yun to see him for the time being. Little Mu Yun nodded obediently. I like Uncle Lin too. However, it would be better if that person was his father. Adults could often guess what a child didn't say. Yi Lianxiu didn't want to say too many cruel words to him. She reached out and touched his head. Okay, go to sleep. Xiao Mian responded with an "oh" and lay down obediently. Yi Lianxiu didn't go anywhere. She directly lay down beside the little body. She half-held her son. She had never said that she also had insomnia. She could only fall asleep when she held Mu Yun. Insomnia could be contagious. Why not love? Little Mu Yun was already in a daze. He asked softly, Mom, do you like Uncle Lin? Does Mu Yun like him? Yes. Then Mom likes him. Little Mu Yun wanted to ask more, but he was a child after all. He always fell asleep easily. As soon as he finished speaking, he didn't say anything. Yi Lianxiu covered him with the quilt and lay down beside him. Mu Yun, I'm sorry. I can't give Dad to you. He has someone else. He's married. Yi Lianxiu didn't sleep that night, and she was a little dizzy the next day. Fortunately, Aunt Zhang took care of Mu Yun for a day, and Mu Yun listened to her. In the evening, Aunt Zhang took little Mu Yun to a nearby square to play. This was a high-end villa area, so the security was very good. Yi Lianxiu did not have to worry. Little Mu Yun was 6 years old. He hadn't gone to school yet, but he liked to play with small balls recently. He bounced the ball not for fun, but because he liked to count while bouncing. When he counted to 1,000, the middle-aged lady sitting beside him laughed. What a smart child. Aunt Zhang quickly smiled. Sitting there was old Madame Qin, the previous head of King Entertainment. She looked at the pretty little boy and then at Annie Zhang. Your grandson? Aunt Zhang wasn't too guarded. She blurted out, It's not mine. It's my employer's child. Lady Qin looked at the little fellow again and asked casually, What's your employer's name? There were more than 10 families living here, and Mrs. Qin knew most of the people who could afford to buy a house. Aunt Zhang thought for a moment and said, Miss Yi. Miss Yi? Mrs. Qin thought for a moment. Is it Yi Lianxiu? Aunt Zhang said yes. She didn't know that the person sitting there was little Mu Yun's biological grandmother. Otherwise, she wouldn't have told her. The more Mrs. Qin looked at the child, the more she felt he looked like a person. Her face slowly turned livid. She liked the child, but she wasn't satisfied with the child's mother. He had a bad background, a crazy mother, and a broken family. She didn't feel comfortable hearing about it. Mrs. Qin didn't show it. Instead, she smiled. Of course, Miss Ye's child is different. Aunt Zhang felt that there was something wrong with the old lady. She seemed to know Miss Yi. So she asked tentatively, "Do you know Miss Yi?" Mrs. Qin said, "She's quite famous. My daughter likes her movies. I didn't expect them to live together. What's more, she gave birth to Anlin's child." Chapter 1298. Lady Qin looked at Mu Yun and waved at him. "Kid, come here and let me have a look." Mu Yun looked at Aunt Zhang. Aunt Zhang was not on guard. She smiled and said, "Go and have a look at that, Grandma." Aunt Zhang did not think much of it. She just felt that the old lady in front of her and Mu Yun were fated. Mu Yun hesitated for a moment, but he still went and stood in front of Lady Qin. Lady Qin reached out and touched his little head. She said gently, "Why haven't you gone to school yet?" Mu Yun looked up and did not tell the truth. He just said, "I didn't go to school today." Lady Qin did not think much of it. She just smiled gently. When her hand left, Mu Yun's scalp hurt. He looked at the old lady in front of him, who was still smiling kindly. Tears flashed in his eyes. He looked so good. Lady Qin looked at him. He looked like Anlin when he was a child. Although they were not exactly the same, there was at least an 80% resemblance. That was why she dared to make such a conclusion. "Grandma will give you a gift next time." Lady Qin touched his little bag again. Mu Yun looked at her and said suddenly, "My favorite is milk buns." Lady Qin was a little surprised. The little person in front of her looked a little cold and did not like to talk, but he was not shy at all. Lady Qin's eyes were even more loving at this thought. After returning home, Aunt Zhang told Yi Lianxiu about it. She said that she saw an old lady in the small square who liked Mu Yun. She thought that Miss Yi would feel better if she said that. But after Aunt Zhang said it, Yi Lianxiu's eyes changed. She looked at Aunt Zhang. "Qin?" Aunt Zhang nodded. "Yes, Qin." Yi Lianxiu pursed her lips. "Don't take Mu Yun out these days." "Oh," Aunt Zhang said, but she did not take it seriously. It was an old lady who looked very noble and treated Mu Yun very well. Yi Lianxiu felt uneasy for several days. She guessed that it was Qin Anlin's mother, but if she took the initiative to ask, it would show that she was guilty. A week later, he finally received a call from an unknown number. "Miss Yi, our madam wants to see you." The voice on the phone was very cautious. Yi Lianxiu held the phone and said indifferently, "I don't know your madam. I got the wrong person. Let me talk to her." A slightly stern voice came from the other side. It was a little old, but it was full of vigor. Yi Lianxiu was silent for a while. "Okay, where is it?" Yi Lianxiu said. Yi Lianxiu said calmly. Yi Lianxiu nodded. "For o'clock. Is that okay?" After that, she put down the phone and said to Aunt Zhang, "Aunt Zhang, take care of Mu Yun at home. I'll go out for a while." Aunt Zhang said, "Don't worry, Miss Yi. I will." Yi Lianxiu then drove out. The white Bentley drove for about half an hour to the restaurant that Lady Qin had mentioned. It was an English-style tea house, which was the favorite place for old ladies to spend time. There were many quaint private rooms, which were very suitable for talking about private matters. Yi Lianxiu was wearing black trousers and a simple white shirt. She walked straight in with the waiter. The waiter opened the wooden door. There was only a middle-aged lady in the English-style private room. She looked kind, but there was a touch of dignity in her eyes. Chapter 1299. She said lightly to the waiter, "You can leave now. I'll be fine here." The waiter recognized her and smiled. "Miss Yi, I'll leave first." He bowed and left. Yi Lianxiu closed the door gently and walked forward slowly. She knelt in front of Lady Qin. There was a cup of black tea and 2 bone china cups in front of her. Yi Lianxiu looked at them. It seemed that there were only the two of them today. She thought that Qin Anlin probably didn't know about this at the moment. Yi Lianxiu poured a cup of black tea for Lady Qin and herself. She stirred it gently. Lady Qin, the temperature is just right. You can drink it now. Lady Qin looked at the girl in front of her. She was tall and thin. She was pretty. She didn't dress up too gorgeously when she came to see her. Just now, that waiter knew you. Why? Did you come here often? Why haven't I seen you before? Lady Qin said slowly. Yi Lianxiu smiled. After a while, she said, not really. Then she knew you because of your fame? She watched your movies? Lady Qin looked at Yi Lianxiu fiercely. Yi Lianxiu lowered her eyes and smiled slightly. Lady Qin wants to remind me that everything I have is given by King Entertainment, right? Lady Qin nodded and finally took a sip of tea. You're very smart. Yi Lianxiu smiled. But Madam has forgotten. I'm a frozen female artist of King Entertainment, so I don't feel too grateful to King Entertainment. I can even say to myself and others that everything I have today was earned by myself. Lady Qin's expression wasn't gentle. She sneered. Sharp-tongued. Yi Lianxiu smiled faintly. Madam is not looking for a daughter-in-law. As a frozen artist, I really don't have to ask for your approval, so I can say whatever I want. Are you always like this? You just want to live freely? Lady Qin's tone was much calmer. Yi Lianxiu smiled again. I want to, but it's not likely. She looked at Lady Qin. Just like I want to live freely now, but Madam won't let me. Lady Qin nodded. I haven't told Amlin about this. As she spoke, she pushed a DNA report in front of Yi Lianxiu. You know what you're doing. Are you going to hand the child over to me? Or wait for Anlan to come back and sue you? Do you want to give the child to me? Or wait for Anlin to come back and sue you? Yi Lianxiu's eyes fell on the report. Lady Qin continued. I know that Anlin and the female artists in the company have some ambiguous relationships. If you had started dating Anlin with your current status, I wouldn't have said anything. But the child is already so big. You just enter the company then. What kind of thoughts did you have when you were with Anlin? 500,000. Yi Lianxiu looked at Lady Qin and sneered. Madam should know everything about President Qin. Why are you asking me? Lady Qin came from a prestigious family. She had never heard such vulgar words before. She couldn't stand it anymore, and her body trembled. But she had good self-control and quickly calmed down. She said sternly, Do you think someone of Miss Ye's status can say something like that? Status? Yi Lianxiu smiled playfully. If Madam had recognized my status, she wouldn't have met me in this way, right? Chapter 1300. Lady Qin's old eyes narrowed. Women who are too smart don't have a good ending. There's still a long way to go before I die. It's too early to talk about this, but Madam, you can think about it. She didn't stand on ceremony with Lady Qin. At this moment, it wasn't a conversation between two women, but two mothers. They were both protecting their children like mother beasts. To Yi Lianxiu, Lady Qin's behavior was taking away her child. She had long passed the age of naivety. Lady Qin had talked to her about Mu Yun without informing Qin Anlin. Even if Mu Yun returned to the Qin family, he would only have one identity, an illegitimate child. She wouldn't let that happen. Lady Qin was indeed the big boss of King Entertainment. She didn't care about a little flower like Yi Lianxiu. She pursed her lips and said in an indifferent tone, Miss Yi, everything can be clearly marked with money. For example, Miss Ye's first time is 500,000 yuan. How much are you selling my grandson Muyin? This was the deepest insult. Yi Lianxiu didn't get angry. Instead, she laughed. Lady Qin, do you think I'll sell my child? You've even sold yourself, haven't you? To be honest, there's pleasure in selling one's body, but there's only pain in selling one's child. Yi Lianxiu smiled coldly. So, I won't sell him. She was even more rude than before. Lady Qin was so angry that she almost fainted. She pointed at her and said, You're shameless. You're a disgrace to us women. You're the shameless one. Madam. Yi Lianxiu stood up slowly and looked down at her. Madam, you've lived alone for so many years. Don't tell me you can't even distinguish between pleasure and pain. She didn't want to bother, and was about to leave. But she was stopped by Lady Qin. Wait. Yi Lianxiu looked up at her. Anything else? Aren't you curious? Where is your child? Lady Qin's voice was also slightly cold. Luckily, she had already made preparations. Crispy Sleeve had said that Yi Lianxiu was very difficult to deal with and was not like an ordinary woman. Luckily, she had already made preparations. Yi Lianxiu clenched her fists. Where did you take Mu Yin? A safe place? There was a touch of contempt in Lady Qin's eyes. Where he should be. Yi Lianxiu narrowed her eyes. Give him back to me. Lady Qin was still sitting, dressed in luxurious clothes. Name a price, and he will be a child of the Qin family from now on. Qin Amlin is married. Yi Lianxiu looked straight at Lady Qin. With Pei Qiqi. How is it? Isn't it exciting? She walked forward step by step. You asked Mu Yin to call Pei Qiqi mom, right? Lady Qin's eyes widened, and she looked at Yi Lianxiu in disbelief. She pointed at her and said in a shrill voice, No, this is impossible. How could this be possible? Absolutely impossible. Anlin wouldn't be so silly, whether it's true or not. You can ask him yourself. Yi Lianxiu's voice was even colder. You will have your own grandson in the future, so return Mu Yun to me. Lady Qin was still murmuring. This is absolutely impossible, absolutely impossible. After saying that, she fell to the ground with a thud. Lady Qin had a heart disease. In the chaos, Yi Lianxiu called 120, and Lady Qin was sent to the hospital for emergency treatment. Yi Lianxiu sat in the corridor of the hospital and waited. No matter what, she had made Lady Qin so angry. No matter how long it took, she had to wait outside. Chapter 1301. Put Mu Yin back. Yi Lianxiu leaned against the cold wall and murmured, I'll compensate her if something happens to her. Her eyes reddened. Old madam has never been bullied like this before. Ms. Yi, you have to respect yourself. How can I respect myself? Yi Lianxiu chuckled. Did you ask for a penny from the Qin family after giving birth alone? You've already gotten enough from King Entertainment. You can't be too greedy. She had been with Lady Qin for a long time. Her tone was like that of an ancient family, suppressing others in every way. Yi Lianxiu sneered. I earned that with my life and sweat, not by selling Mu Yun. She was speechless for a long time before saying, Let's wait until old madam wakes up. Just then, a maid from the Qin family rushed over with a panicked expression. Oh no, oh no. She looked at her and scolded. Nonsense. Old madam is in the operating room now. Why are you yelling about this now? Yes, that child was hit and he's bleeding nonstop. The maid's voice was trembling. It's so scary. Yi Lianxiu grabbed her. What did you say? The maid was even more afraid, and her voice was unsteady. He's bleeding nonstop. It's so scary. Where is he? Yi Lianxiu's voice was shrill and hoarse. Where? He was sent to the hospital. The maid swallowed hard. He needs a blood transfusion, but he has Rh-negative blood. The blood bank doesn't have it. Would that child die? She was the one who pushed him. She didn't do it on purpose. She really didn't. Yi Lianxiu dialed Dr. Lin's number with trembling hands. Xin, bring those two people over. They're at Sea City General Hospital. Hurry, Mu Yun is bleeding. Got it? Don't panic, he'll be fine. I'll be right there. Lin Xingyuan was on duty last night and didn't change his clothes. He drove out in his home clothes and brought them over in less than 20 minutes. When Yi Lianxiu put down her phone, Su Xiu looked at her. Rh-negative blood. It was the same for the young master. It wasn't strange, but why would Yi Lianxiu keep two Rh-negative people on standby? There was something wrong with that child's body. Crisp Sleeve folded her hands and silently said, Old lady, it's not worth it for a sick child. The child was sick and could not be kept. Two operating theaters, one on the east and the other on the west. Two blood-related people were in the operating theater. Fortunately, they were all fine. When Qin Amlin came back, it was already late at night. He walked to Lady Qin's ward and looked at Lady Qin's pale face for a long time before he carefully placed her slightly cold hand under the quilt and asked in a deep voice, "Why did my mother suddenly collapse from anger? If not for timely treatment, he might have died." Qingxiu's heart thumped. Old Madam forbade her from talking about the young master. Moreover, the child was obviously problematic. Whether or not Old Madam wanted him in the future was another matter. It wasn't the right time to talk about it. Hence, she thought for a moment and said, "Old Madam met Missy by chance. It turns out that they live in the same neighborhood, so they had tea together. Unexpectedly, Missy told her about young master's marriage in New York, and Old Madam collapsed." Qin Amlin narrowed his eyes. She said it? Only Yi Lianxiu knew about this, so he didn't doubt it at all. Chapter 1302. Qin Amlin let out a long sigh. Got it? Qingxiu looked at him and sighed again. The old lady's health isn't good. Missy really shouldn't have provoked her. After saying that, she also looked at Qin Amlin reproachfully. Qin Amlin naturally understood what she meant. After the old lady wakes up, "Young master, don't provoke her anymore. The old lady's life hasn't been easy," Qingxiu said, her eyes turning red. Qin Amlin sat there without saying a word. He reached out and touched Lady Qin's face. Qingxiu looked at him and didn't say anything. Young master still had deep feelings for the old lady. That made things easier. The doctor came over and checked the situation. He said in a low voice, "The old lady has been taking good care of herself these few years. If it was a few years ago, it would probably be over." Qin Amlin's eyes were a little red, and he felt a little guilty. Dr. Zhao was also familiar with him and could be considered to have a personal relationship with the Qin family. He patted his shoulder. "There's always no problem. Be careful in the future and don't make the old lady angry again." Qin Amlin nodded. "I know. The surgery isn't serious. She can go back to rest after about a week." Dr. Zhao pursed his lips and smiled. "Don't worry, the old lady's body is very strong." Qin Amlin still had a lingering fear and forced a smile. He sent Dr. Zhao away and took the opportunity to smoke outside. He was a little annoyed. He leaned there with a cigarette in one hand and his phone in the other. He looked down for a long time and still called Yi Lianxiu. It was a man who answered. His voice was gentle and elegant. "Are you looking for Lianxiu?" Qin Amlin froze for a moment and immediately thought of the man he saw the other day. He said in a cold voice, "Where is she?" Lin Xuan paused for a moment and then said softly, "She just went out. I'll tell her when she comes back." Qin Amlin narrowed his eyes and wanted to say something, but his gaze froze. Then, he put his hand down and stared at the woman in front of him. "Yi Lianxiu, in the middle of the night, did you come here because of guilt?" Qin Amlin's voice was very cold. Yi Lianxiu looked in that direction and said calmly, "I just want to see how she is. It was almost gone. Are you satisfied now?" Qin Amlin approached her step by step and grabbed her neck. "Yi Lianxiu, do you hate me that much? I don't understand what President Qin is talking about." Yi Lianxiu looked calm. "Don't understand?" Qin Amlin roughly pulled her into his embrace, forcefully clasping her. With just one hand, he restrained her, preventing her from escaping. His pupils contracted rapidly. "You can't possibly not know how much of a blow this is to her. Then why did you still do it?" Yi Lianxiu said coldly, "President Qin, if you do it, you have to bear the consequences." He looked at her beautiful face, stared at her eyes, and suddenly pushed her away. Yi Lianxiu hit straight against the opposite wall. Her shoulder blade was in pain, but she still smiled. "Don't you want to ask why I told her?" "I don't want to know." His voice was cold. "If my mother is fine, then forget it. If something happens to her, then, Yi Lianxiu, I will make you regret living in this world." Her body was close to the wall behind her, and she closed her eyes slightly. "Qin Amlin, I understand." When she opened her eyes again, she smiled lightly. "I don't regret it." She thought that a sick child couldn't enter the eyes of Lady Qin. After she woke up, she wouldn't tell Qin Amlin about the existence of Mu Yun. That was good. Chapter 13:03. But when she looked at his eyes, she still felt a little hurt, she still felt a little disappointed. The person she used to like didn't trust her at all. His mother had fallen ill from anger, so he felt that she was doing it on purpose to take revenge on him. She should have given up. Qin Amlin wasn't the person who understood her. Yi Lianqiu's words made him even angrier. He walked over step by step and finally landed in front of her. She raised her hand and looked at him. "Are you looking for me?" Her voice was soft, but it was clear in the night. Was he going to hit her? He wanted to hit her. Tears gathered in her eyes, stubbornly refusing to fall. At that moment, Qin Amlin had an illusion that the images of Yi Lianqiu and Chi-Chi overlapped. He thought he was looking at Pei Chi-Chi. His thin lips moved, and his Adam's apple moved rapidly. But in the end, he put his hand down, stared at her eyes, and said, "Get lost." Yi Lianqiu's lips trembled, and she slowly straightened her body. Her back was aching, as if her bones were broken. She slowly straightened up, and without looking at him, she turned and walked towards the elevator. Lin Xingyuan stood at the entrance of the elevator. She didn't know how long he had been standing there. Perhaps he had seen her from the beginning. She couldn't move her feet, so she could only look at him at this moment. He was her savior. Lin Xingyuan walked over slowly, put her phone in her palm, and said slowly, "I forgot my phone." She lowered her head and nodded. Her long hair covered her eyes, so Qin Amlin couldn't see a drop of hot tears falling on Lin Xingyuan's palm. He felt hot, but he wasn't surprised. It wasn't surprising that she would cry. Actually, she was only in her 20s, and she had been independent for so long, she was still a child. Perhaps it was because Lin Xingyuan had watched her grow up from a child to this, and he felt pity for her in his heart. Most of the time, when he looked at her, he still felt that she was the helpless girl from 5 or 6 years ago. Her forehead was full of sweat, and she told him that she wanted the child in her belly. At that time, she was already half the world famous. She knew exactly what this meant to her. Lin Xingyuan gently and firmly held her hand. "Let's go. Mu Yun is waiting for you." Yi Lianqiu looked at his hand for a long time and finally put her hand in his. Lin Xingyuan clenched his fist. "All right, let's go." Qin Amlin stood in place, watching as she was taken away by others. He took a long drag on his cigarette. Actually, he wanted to hit her just now, but in the end, he couldn't bring himself to do it. It wasn't because she was a woman, and it wasn't because he had some principle of not hitting women. It was all because she was Yi Lianqiu. It was all because she was the girl he hugged to sleep many years ago. He was sure that if it had been someone else, he probably wouldn't have let them off so easily. The elevator opposite opened, and she and the man entered. The elevator across from him closed, and he couldn't see her. Qin Amlin threw away the cigarette in his hand and stepped on it to extinguish it. He looked at her with a profound gaze, and the feeling of powerlessness welled up again. But again he chose to ignore it. After all, she had hurt his mother. In the elevator, Yi Lianqiu's legs were a little weak, and her fingers dug into Lin Xingyuan's arm. Chapter 13:04. With Qin Amlin's power, she couldn't compete with Mu Yun. Lin Xingyuan nodded. "I don't think so." He stroked her face with his fingers. "Lianqiu, can I take you away? Abroad or the south?" She looked at him in a daze. "My uncle's private hospital needs a chief surgeon. He asked me to go there. It's an H city. The medical conditions there are not worse than B city. Lianqiu, come with me, okay?" He held her face. "As for the blood, we can use cold storage. Also, I will take good care of him in the future. I won't let him get hurt easily." Yi Lianqiu was stunned. After a long time, she said softly, "Xing, let me think about it." She buried her face in the crook of his arm. She cried because his arm was wet and warm, and it was very uncomfortable, but he couldn't bear to let go of her. He reached out and stroked her hair gently. "You can come back if you want to." She shook her head desperately and tried to suppress herself. After a long time, she buried her face in his arm and said softly, "Xingyuan, I'll go to H City with you." Lin Xingyuan was ecstatic. He wanted to kiss her, but he didn't dare to do so. She was like a goddess in his heart. He couldn't offend her easily. Back in the ward, Mu Yun was already asleep, accompanied by Aunt Zhang. Seeing Yi Lianxiu come back, Aunt Zhang felt a little guilty. She said softly, "Miss Yi, I'm sorry. I didn't expect this to happen." "It's okay." Yi Lianxiu looked down, "But we're going to H-City in a few days." Aunt Zhang was stunned and couldn't say anything for a long time. Miss Yi treated her well, but she still didn't listen to her. She took Mu Yin out this afternoon, which caused trouble. Aunt Zhang said softly, "I know, Miss Yi. I'll pack my things later." Yi Lianxiu didn't blame her, because it was useless. "I'll give you 3 months' salary," Yi Lianxiu said and looked out of the window. It was time to go. She didn't see Qin Anlin for the next few days. However, when Mu Yun was discharged from the hospital, Lady Qin's maid came over and said that Lady Qin wanted to see her. Yi Lianxiu thought that Qin Anlin would not be there, so it was okay to meet him. Crispy Sleeve pushed open the door of the ward. Lady Qin was lying down. She looked a little more tired than before. "Old lady, Miss Yi is here." Soft Sleeves went over and gently put a pillow behind Lady Qin's waist. Yi Lianxiu stood there calmly. Half sitting, Lady Qin raised her eyes and looked at Yi Lianxiu sharply. "I thought you would please me more or less. Crying and begging for your forgiveness? Begging you to let me in?" Yi Lianxiu smiled softly. "I don't want to provoke you, so let's talk about something gentle. Okay? Anlin want to see you?" Lady Qin's eyes were like torches. She looked at the girl in front of her and said in an aggressive tone. Yi Lianxiu nodded slightly. "Yes. He warned me not to provoke you again." "He said that if I dared to offend you again, I would regret living in this world." Yi Lianxiu looked at Lady Qin. "Are you satisfied with what he said?" Lady Qin's voice was a little exasperated. "I won't let you in. What an unpleasant personality. Coincidentally, I don't want to enter the Qin family's door either." Yi Lianxiu's voice was cold. Chapter 1305. Crispy Sleeve hurried forward and gently patted her chest. She scolded Yi Lianxiu. "Miss Yi, please don't say too much. The old lady's health isn't good. When she gets angry, no one will have a good life." "That's what I think too." Yi Lianxiu took something out of her pocket and placed it in front of Lady Qin. "I think after seeing this, we won't have to have such unpleasant conversations anymore." Lady Qin had already heard about Mu Yun's situation from Crispy Sleeve. But after reading the report, she frowned. This child really is sick, and it wasn't a light illness. It was hard to say if he could inherit the Qin family's business. In Lady Qin's life, the thing she disliked the most was taking risks. What's more, this risk involved Yi Lianxiu, the Yi Lianxiu she disliked. After weighing the pros and cons, she made a decision. "It's good that he's gone. I'll give you some money. Don't ever tell Anlin that this child is his. It's best if he never comes back." Lady Qin's words were heartless. Yi Lianxiu just smiled. "I can still afford to raise my own child." Lady Qin was stunned. After a long time, she said, "I heard that you got together with a doctor?" "Yes." Yi Lianxiu didn't hide it. "I'll go to H-City with him." Lady Qin was a little disappointed. She had thought that the Qin family had a descendant. That child was really good, but she didn't expect that he was sick. And now, Anlin was messing around in New York. She had to stop him. Chung Chung was the only daughter-in-law in her heart. She was smart, beautiful, likable, and had a pure bloodline. Lady Qin sighed. "Let's go. Just pretend that I don't know about this." Yi Lianxiu knew that people were heartless, but at that moment, she felt a little sad. There was no one else but her for Mu Yun. Perhaps leaving was the best choice. After she left, Lady Qin looked at the list for a long time and said to her confidant, "If the child is not sick, if Yi Lianxiu's body is soft, maybe." Crisp Sleeve helped her take down the pillow and lightly advised, "Old lady, don't think too much. Young master is still young. There will be plenty of opportunities in the future." Lady Qin snorted. "He's in New York now, mesmerized by that little vixen. How can he still think about having children?" As far as she knew, Pei Chi-Chi's health wasn't good. She shouldn't have been able to give birth a long time ago. Soft Sleeve came over and said a few words. After saying that, Lady Qin was shocked and angry. Really? Crispy Sleeve nodded. Lady Qin thought for a moment. Let's keep this a secret for now. Not many people know about this. Even if Tang Yu noticed it, he probably didn't want to alert the enemy. She sighed in her heart. Anlin can have any kind of woman he wants. Why does he have to target his wife? Crispy Sleeve smiled faintly. I've seen Pei Chi-Chi. Old lady should have seen her a few times too. Don't you think she looks like someone? Lady Qin thought for a long time. Her eyes lit up and she looked at her personal maid. You mean Yi Lianxiu? Crispy Sleeve nodded. Old lady, think again. Who did young master meet first? Of course it's Yi Lianxiu. I know that she entered King Entertainment at the age of 19. Lady Qin didn't hesitate. Crispy Sleeve nodded again. Old lady, don't you think that young master treats Yi Lianxiu very special? Chapter 1306. Are you saying that the person Amlin really likes is Yi Lianxiu? Lady Qin frowned. Soft Sleeve sighed. It's not a guess. I saw young master's gaze when he saw Yi Lianxiu. There are hidden emotions that even he doesn't know about. Lady Qin closed her eyes. This brat. Soft Sleeve forced a smile. It's probably because after Shen Lian, young master doesn't dare to trust women. He always feels that they have ulterior motives when they are with him. Maybe it's because Pei Chi-Chi is like Miss Yi, or maybe it's because he feels that Pei Chi-Chi doesn't need anything from him. That's why he's so persistent. He's messing around. Lady Qin's emotions were a little agitated. Is there happiness like this? Soft Sleeve didn't say anything. She secretly saw that young master wanted to hit Miss Yi. At that time, young master's expression was indescribably lonely. She also saw that after Yi Lianxiu and the others left, young master clenched his fists and looked up as if he was trying his best to endure something. If this wasn't love, what was it? However, she still didn't say it in detail to agitate the old lady. Otherwise, it would be over if she couldn't endure it. After all, Lady Qin was better. After talking for a while, she was a little tired and lay down. Soft Sleeve helped her tidy up the blanket and put the report aside. When Qin Anlin came over, he sat down and asked a few questions. After a while, he saw a list on the table and picked it up to read. It's a folk prescription. The old lady doesn't let young master see it. Otherwise, young master will say it's not scientific. Soft Sleeve smiled and snatched the list. She folded it and put it in her pocket. Soft Sleeve had followed the old lady for decades. Her status in the Qin family was naturally superior. Qin Anlin had always respected her. At this moment, he didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. He smiled. Aunt Xiao, do as you see fit. Some prescriptions might not be bad. Crispy Sleeve teased. After getting married, young master has changed. Qin Anlin was stunned and forced a smile. His marriage was not a marriage at all. It was more like raising a child at home. He wanted to kiss Chi-Chi, but Chi-Chi would block his lips and say, Anlin, you haven't brushed your teeth. When he finished brushing his teeth, she scoundrelly commented that his toothpaste smelled bad. He had used more than 20 different flavors of toothpaste, but none of them were to her liking. She was the one who didn't like him kissing her. A year had passed, and he no longer forced her. Marriage is like drinking water. Only one knows the temperature of the water. He didn't know why he was still holding on to this relationship that didn't belong to him, but he vaguely didn't want to give up. Perhaps it was because he felt that he had given up on something, so he was exceptionally persistent this time. Soft Sleeve looked at his expression. Young master, if you want to make old madam happy, then marry Su Chung. Qin Anlin glanced at Lady Qin and didn't say anything. After he left, Lady Qin lay on the bed and sighed. Soft Sleeve, you saw it. He's so stubborn. Lady Qin sat up slowly. After a long time, she said softly, give him some more time. Soft Sleeve nodded. Another year passed. Cheen Amlin was still mainly in New York and rarely came back. Lady Cheen was trimming the peach blossoms in the courtyard. The flowers have already fallen, but he hasn't come back. She paused for a moment before continuing. Recently, King Entertainment has been suppressed by Boyi. Obviously, Tang Yu knows that Pei Chi-Chi is with Amlin. Soft Sleeve smiled lightly. Young master can handle it. Chapter 1307. When Lady Cheen asked, Soft Sleeve thought about it and said, she's still in H City. She's living a peaceful life. Hearing this, Lady Cheen was silent for a while, then sighed. She's quiet and calm. Soft Sleeve. Do you think she doesn't want to marry into a rich family? Lady Cheen felt that she was old and couldn't understand these young people. Soft Sleeve smiled. How could that be? She saw that the old lady didn't like her, so she backed out. This is also good. It's just a pity for that child. Lady Cheen sighed. If only she wasn't sick. It was early summer, and Lady Cheen was still dressed thickly. She was pushed into the courtyard by Soft Sleeve and looked at the flowers in the courtyard that were blooming. She pursed her lips. I met Mrs. Su yesterday. The youngest daughter of the Su family is already 25 years old. She can't keep waiting for Anlin. When she said this, Soft Sleeve was shocked. She thought to herself, young master is already married, so there's no chance between him and Su Chung. Why did the old lady say that? Did she have some plans in mind? Sure enough, her guess was correct. Madame Cheen slowly stood up and walked to a bush of flowers. She plucked the flower that bloomed the most and then slowly said, Su Xiao, accompany me to the south. I heard that the scenery there isn't bad at this time of year. Soft Sleeve nodded. Okay, old lady, let's go enjoy the scenery. As for the person who asked the old lady to meet, let's not see him. Old Lady Cheen looked at her and smiled after a while. You know me. I just don't understand. The old lady clearly doesn't like Miss Yi. So why do you still want to see her? Soft Sleeve hesitated for a moment before asking. Old Lady Cheen's heart was like a mirror. How could this Soft Sleeve not guess? She just smiled. I'm not looking at her. I'm looking at my grandson. Soft Sleeve only pursed her lips and smiled, not saying much. A week later, Lady Cheen and Soft Sleeve arrived in H City. The black RV drove to a small villa in H City. The white European-style villa was unique. Although it was small, it was very cozy. From the outside, the small garden inside was also well maintained. It was early in the morning. Little Mu Yin was sitting in the garden, digging something. Yi Lianqiu walked over, pulled him up, and wiped his hands. Then, the two of them stood together. One big and one small, they looked very cozy. Lady Cheen sat in the limousine and watched. Her voice was indifferent. Looking at him like this, I can't tell that there's something wrong with this child. He looks so good. Lady Cheen thought of her relatives from the side branch of the Cheen family. None of their children looked as good as Yi Muyun. What a pity. Crispy Sleeve stayed by her side and patted Lady Cheen's hand. If old madam feels that it's a pity, there's nothing to be regretful about. The heir of the Cheen family must have a good body. Lady Cheen's tone was firm. Qingxiu's heart skipped a beat, and she didn't dare to say anything else. She couldn't figure out what the old lady was thinking. At this moment, Lin Xingyuan also came out from the living room. He was dressed neatly. He leaned over and kissed little Mu Yun, then touched Yi Lianqiu's arm. Only then did he get into the car and slowly drive out of the villa. When he brushed past Lady Cheen's car, Lin Xingyuan didn't notice it. Lady Cheen looked and sighed. They're a good match. Chapter 1308. Why? Do you feel sorry for that girl? Lady Cheen turned her head and smiled faintly. Soft Sleeve immediately lowered her head. How could that be? I feel sorry for the old lady the most. Lady Cheen's gaze was dignified. It's good that you understand the severity of the situation. Old lady? Soft Sleeve couldn't help but exclaim. If you do this, young master will blame the old lady in the future. Lady Cheen's gaze was still on the adult and child in the yard. After a while, she laughed softly. You really know what I'm thinking. Soft Sleeve didn't dare to say another word. She wanted to persuade her, but she didn't dare. The old lady would hurt young master if she did this. She clearly knew that young master really liked Leoncio, but she still did this. When young master couldn't extricate himself, Soft Sleeve didn't dare to continue thinking. Lady Chin looked at Soft Sleeve. You know me. I never change my mind once I've decided on something. Go and invite Missy over for a chat. Missy might not be willing, Soft Sleeve said in a low voice. But she still got out of the car. Lady Chin watched her walk to the front of the villa. She saw Leoncio let the child in first. Then she walked out, opened the car door, and sat beside Lady Chin. Long time no see, Miss Yi. Lady Chin's voice was a little stiff. Leoncio's voice was indifferent. Long time no see, Lady Chin. Aren't you curious why I came to find you? Lady Chin waited for a long time, but she didn't speak again, so she said unhappily. Leoncio smiled. You're not here to see us, right? Lady Chin was stunned. Soft Sleeve, who was in front, almost laughed out loud. Leoncio paused for a moment before continuing. Lady Chin, Mu Yun's health isn't very good. My focus is on him. If Lady Chin needs help, I'm afraid I won't be able to help. After she finished speaking, Lady Chin frowned while Qingxiu praised her. Although Leoncio had been promoted by King Entertainment, one had to admit that she was very smart. It was no wonder that the young master liked her so much that he didn't dare to admit it. Lady Chin's heart was full of bitterness. She squinted at Leoncio and said, How can you be sure that I have ulterior motives? Because I don't see a trace of warmth in your eyes. Leoncio said in a low voice, Lady Chin, I just want to live a peaceful life. I don't think you will deny me such a chance, right? Lady Chin narrowed her eyes. What if I say that I'm willing to accept you as my daughter-in-law? Leoncio smiled faintly. Then should I accept it? Lady Chin's face changed greatly. Miss Yi, don't push your luck. You're the one who's pushing your luck. Leoncio's voice was also full of coldness. Mu Yun is Qin Anlin's child, but back then, he wanted me to take the morning after pill. Then why do you still have a child? Lady Chin's voice was dignified. Leoncio said lightly, It was the first time I had a child. I didn't understand at that time. There was a touch of distance in her eyes. If it weren't for that pill, perhaps Mu Yun wouldn't be living in such pain. Have you ever regretted it? Lady Chin narrowed her eyes and looked at her. Leoncio lowered her eyes. I'm living very well now, but if Lady Chin insists on having her way and makes things difficult for me, I'm afraid that one day I'll regret it. At that time, Madam might also regret it. You hurt my son, so I'll hurt your son. Chapter 1309. Lady Chin was stunned. After a long while, she came back to her senses. You're very bold. Madam is a mother, and so am I. Leoncio pursed her lips tightly, and then smiled lightly. I hope Madam won't make things difficult for me. She pushed the door open, and when she got out of the car, her legs were weak. She clenched her fingers, and her heart was filled with anger. She knew very well that Lady Chin only wanted to use her to push Pei Chi away, and then the position of Mrs. Chin would belong to Su Chung. Leoncio was just a springboard. She felt a little sad. What she didn't want, others would want to force on her. Lady Chin didn't stop her. After the car door closed, Lady Chin said lightly, She's just too smart. She's not as simple as Su Chung. Soft Sleeve said cautiously, As long as young master likes it. Lady Chin glared at her. Anlin likes to fool around. Are you going to let him do what he wants? Soft Sleeve didn't say anything. Lady Chin looked in the direction of the villa again, and her face was cold. Looks like she's not willing. No one would be willing. Soft Sleeve didn't dare to say that. Let's go, Lady Chin said in a low voice, and the black limousine slowly drove away. After the car drove away, a red sports car also drove past slowly. Sitting in the driver's seat was a young girl wearing sunglasses. After driving past, her gaze fell in the direction of the villa. Long time no see. The car slowly chased after the black limousine. The car drove so fast that it barely brushed past the car. Ulwich, I'll hit you to death. The red sports car sped away. Lady Cheen was shocked. These young people are too outrageous. Soft sleeve massage her arm. Old madam, do you want to go to the hospital for a checkup? I'm fine. Lady Cheen sounded unhappy. Let's go to the airport. Su Xiao heaved a sigh of relief. In her heart, she was willing to let Yi Liangxiu live a simple life. Young master did like her, but young master had let her down. Moreover, Yi Liangxiu had also found a suitable person. However, peace did not come. With the arrival of Lady Cheen, Yi Liangxiu's peaceful life was completely disrupted. Lin Xingyuan did not return that night because of a medical accident. It was a simple surgery with Lin Xingyuan as the chief surgeon, but the patient died on the operating table. The patient died because there was a large deviation between the surgical site and the image. The patient's family immediately sealed off the hospital. Because the hospital was a private hospital, the patient's family was also well known in the local area, so this matter was not easy to deal with. Furthermore, the deceased husband had threatened to put Lin Xingyuan in jail. The hospital was opened by Lin Xingyuan's uncle. Although he wanted to save him, he was powerless. After receiving the call, Yi Liangxiu hurried to the hospital, but Lin Xingyuan had already been detained. Yi Liangxiu met Lin Xingyuan's uncle, Lin Hengxiu. The men of the Lin family all looked elegant, and she could see the shadow of Lin Xingyuan in him. It's not that I don't want to protect Xingyuan. This time, he was maliciously framed. I went to investigate the mistakes in the middle, but I couldn't find anything. Lin Hengxiu sighed. Liangxiu, I'm afraid I can't protect him this time. Uncle Lin, Xingyuan wouldn't make such a mistake. Yi Bingxiu looked at Lin Hengxiu. Lin Hengxiu looked at her, wanting to say something, but hesitating. After a while, he said in a low voice, only you can save him. Chapter 1310. But it was different this time. The other party obviously didn't care about human lives. He only cared about killing Xingyuan. Yi Liangxiu was stunned. Me? Yes. Lin Hengxiu said tactfully. Think about it. Who do you know that can solve such a problem? Yi Liangxiu thought of Lady Cheen. Could she have done it? She didn't want to go to Lady Cheen, but she didn't ask for it. Xingyuan might have to go to jail for 10 years. Don't worry, uncle. I'll think of a way. Yi Liangxiu smiled bitterly. She understood what Lin Hengxiu meant. Xingyuan was so good to her. If there was no other choice, she should sacrifice herself once. Yi Liangxiu went downstairs quietly. She sat in the car and felt a little tired. Was her peaceful life coming to an end? She took out her phone and was about to call Lady Cheen. She didn't hesitate because she was afraid that if she hesitated, she would lose her courage. Before she could make the call, the car door opened. She looked up at the person outside the window. It was Meng Qingqing. She had met him once. Our CEO wants to see Miss Yi. Meng Qingqing said calmly. Yi Liangxiu looked at him, then slowly put down her phone and got out of the car. A handsome man stood next to the car in front with his hands behind his back. He looked especially noble in the night. But as she looked at him, she felt a little lonely. Yi Liangxiu walked over slowly and stood in front of him. Mr. Tang, I'll help you save Lin Xingyuan. You call Qin Amlin and tell him about Yi Muyun's existence. Stall him for 3 months. Tang Yu said straightforwardly. Yi Liangxiu looked at the unfathomable man in front of her and pursed her lips. Did you do what happened to Xingyuan? No. Tang Yu didn't get angry. He just answered her calmly. She believed him when he said that. Tang Yu really didn't look like someone who would use such despicable means. She pursed her lips. What do I get out of working with you? You don't need to be controlled by others. You can even anger the person you want to anger to death. Tang Yu smiled. Yi Liangxiu looked down. It seems that Mr. Tang has seen through everything. I happen to be looking for my wife, so I paid extra attention to Miss Yi. I hope you don't mind. Tang Yu smiled faintly. Trust me, if you cooperate with me, it'll be easier for you to escape. Or rather, it'll be more respectful. Yi Liangxiu narrowed her eyes. Also, I can send people to protect you and your child. Tang Yu's tone was indifferent. At least I can guarantee that you can choose whether to stay or leave after this. Yi Lianxiu looked at the calm man in front of her. It was hard to imagine that he could still be so calm after losing his wife. And he seemed to read her mind. He smiled lightly, lowered his head, and looked up at the boundless night. After a long time, he said, Yi Lianxiu, if you have been waiting for someone, then you will get used to it. As long as she is well, one day, she will come back to you. She was stunned. This is 100 million. I think you should know what to do. He put the check in her hand. As for how to use it, it's up to you. Tonight he will arrive in B City. Tang Yu's tone was still calm. Pei Chi will come back with him. After saying that, he turned around and left. She looked at the check in her hand and smiled softly. Yes, a more honorable way. Finally, she picked up her phone and dialed Keim's number. Chapter 1311. Miss Yi. Keim was about to go to the airport in B City to pick up the plane when he received a call from Yi Lianxiu. He was very surprised. It's me. Yi Lianxiu's voice was as cold as the night. Can you tell President Qin? His son is in H City. He broke his leg and needs his Rh-negative blood. Keim was stunned. Keim trembled. Son? President Qin's son? Yi Lianxiu's son? He held his phone and couldn't say anything for a long time. About a minute later, Keim found his voice. I'll tell President Qin later. Please rest assured, Miss Yi. From the bottom of his heart, Keim had some feelings for Yi Lianxiu. After all, he had watched her grow from a little girl to a heavenly queen. He also knew that she and President Qin had lived together for a while. However, he didn't expect that someone would die. Yi Lianxiu's voice was indifferent. Thank you. Keim slid his hand down and smiled. This time it was a big deal. President Qin came back with Pei Chi. At this moment, Yi Lianxiu said that she was pregnant. Keim sighed. Everything was for the sake of the child. After Yi Lianxiu finished the phone call, she went to the detention center. Just as Tang Yu had said, the family of the deceased had withdrawn their lawsuit and Lin Xingyuan was released. In addition, Meng Qingqing was also there. He gave Yi Lianxiu a piece of information, which contained some unknown transactions of Lady Qin. Yi Lianxiu didn't show it to Lin Xingyuan, but he could guess it. Meng Qingqing left soon. Before he left, he just said lightly, don't forget your deal with Mr. Tang. Yi Lianxiu nodded. After he left, Lin Xingyuan got into the car, sat next to her, and slowly fastened his seatbelt. She also silently. Lianxiu, are you going to leave? He finally asked with difficulty. He clearly knew that she would never belong to him, but he still kept her for a year. This year they lived very well. He didn't force her to do anything, and she treated him as her closest relative. He helped her take care of Mu Yun. Sometimes, she would wait for him to come back from his shift in the middle of the night to cook for him. Lin Xingyuan was not a person with strong emotions. The feelings he wanted were faint. Just like this, it was enough. He sat, aware that she was leaving. However, he wanted to ask her a question that he had wanted to ask for a long time. If this continues, will you like me? Even if it was just a little bit. Yi Lianxiu's hands were on the steering wheel. After a long time, she smiled and said, Xingyuan, of course. Lin Xingyuan smiled as well. He covered his face with his hands and let out a long sigh. Lianxiu, you should go. I can't protect you. He was not afraid, but when he realized that he would become her burden and her weakness, he had no right to say that he liked her. He was not such a naive person. He said in a low voice, if there's a chance, give Mu Yun a younger brother or sister. You know. Yi Lianxiu slowly turned her head and looked at his painful and helpless eyes. After a long time, she said softly, I know. Lianxiu, will you blame me? Blame him for giving up on her so easily. She shook her head and put her finger on his lips. Xingyuan, I understand you, and you understand me. These words do not need to be said. There was no heart-wrenching pain in their separation, only a faint regret. They had many friends, but not many lovers. This was their current state. Chapter 13:12. Lin Xingyuan opened it slowly, and there was a platinum ring inside. It was a simple ring, but it was elegant and beautiful. "It's my mother's." He smiled. "Liangxiu, this is for you as a souvenir." Yi Liangxiu looked at it and took it. She pulled off the chain around her neck, put the ring on, and put it back on. She touched it gently with her fingers. "I like it very much." Lin Xingyuan smiled bitterly and didn't say anything else. He couldn't give her what he really wanted to give. "I'll always be here. If you're tired one day, come back." He reached out and stroked her long hair. "Liangxiu, can I kiss you?" It had been a year, and he hadn't kissed her even once. But now he wanted to kiss her. Yi Liangxiu didn't say anything. Lin Xingyuan leaned over and kissed her lightly on the lips. Just for a second, what he felt was not sweetness, but heartbreak. "Liangxiu, I'm sorry I can't protect you." He hugged her gently. Yi Liangxiu rested her chin on his shoulder and said lightly, "Xing, be my brother." He was stunned, but he quickly reacted. "Okay." He reached out and stroked her hair. "You have to be well." From that night onwards, Lin Xingyuan knew that Yi Liangxiu would never fall in love with him. She drove her back, and that night, she moved to the hotel with Mu Yun late at night. City B Airport. Pei Chi avoided Qin Anlin's sight and ran to the washroom. She ran to the wrong place. At that moment, she saw a handsome back view going to the washroom. "Have you seen enough?" The man's movements were still slow, and he didn't seem uncomfortable at all. His voice was also a little lazy. Pei Chi's mouth was wide open, so wide that an egg could be stuffed in. Tang Yu zipped up and turned his body. There wasn't much expression on his face, but in his eyes, there was a fire that she couldn't see. 2 years? For 2 whole years, there was no news of her. Even if he guessed that she was alive, he would not be able to find her. Finally, he found her. As for Pei Chi, she looked at the place where he had just zipped up, and then at his nose. Her face was a little red, and her body was a little warm. She actually had that kind of shameful feeling towards a strange man. It was the kind of feeling that made her want to throw herself at him. Even, she wanted to tear off his clothes and slap him. She wanted to slap his body, the kind with nothing hanging. How shameful. She cupped her face and took a step back. "I'm in the wrong place." The man took a step forward and walked towards her step by step. In the end, she was forced between the wall and his body. "Just now, where were you looking at?" His voice was mellow and hoarse, making her blush even more. She bit her lips and looked at him helplessly. After a long time, she said softly, "I didn't." "You're lying." Tang Yu's face was next to her ear. "Count your heartbeat. Isn't it a lot faster?" Her heartbeat was very fast, but his was even faster. Because his Chi had forgotten about him, she didn't remember him, but she remembered his body. Pei Chi turned her head. "I'm not counting," but she turned her head too fast, and her lips brushed against his. Tang Yu looked at her with a burning gaze. Pei Chi took a step back, but there was nowhere to go. Her head hit the wall. Chapter 13:13. Tears welled up in Pei Chi's eyes. She looked at the man in front of her. "It hurts?" She pouted and wanted to touch the wound on the back of her head. However, a big palm pressed on the back of her head faster than her. "Is it here?" She nodded. She felt that he was rubbing her head comfortably. She almost thanked him. When it didn't hurt anymore, she remembered that she was a stranger to this man. Tang Yu couldn't help smiling when he saw her alert eyes. "Why? Are you afraid that I'll do something to you?" He looked around. "Well, there's no one here." There's no if." Pei Chi said quickly. "I'm leaving. Let go of me." Tang Yu didn't let go of her. He looked at her and said, "Do you want me to walk you out?" "No need." She broke free from him and jumped away. She looked like a young girl in her 20s. She was already 25 years old at this time. There was a smile in Tang Yu's eyes. He didn't say anything else and just held her hand. At that moment, Pei Chi's heart was beating wildly. How could she be so irresistible? "Oh no," she cheated. She climbed the wall. His palm was a little dry. He held her sweaty hand. Pei Chi wanted to break free, but she only managed to do so for a moment before he held her tightly again. Behave yourself. His voice was a little low. Otherwise, I'll lock you in the men's room. She glared at him. Ming 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 was so noble, but he was so shameless. As for him, he calmly and naturally held her hand as they walked out of the room. As soon as they went out, they saw Qin Anlin waiting for her. Pei Chi immediately shook off Tang Yu's hand and stuck out her tongue. My husband. Tang Yu and Qin Anlin looked at each other. When Qin Anlin saw Pei Chi shake off Tang Yu's hand, he wasn't happy. Instead, his eyes dimmed. She had never allowed him to hold her hand for more than 2 minutes, saying it was like holding a child's hand. So it wasn't that she didn't like him, but he wasn't the one she wanted to hold hands with. He just looked at her like that. When she came in front of him, he reached out and ruffled her hair. I'll get old Zhang to send you back to the apartment. Be good and sleep. What about you? Pei Chi took the key and looked at her with her cute eyes. Qin Anlin smiled and said, I have to go back to the company for a meeting. Pei Chi replied with a no, then hopped towards the exit. Tang Yu didn't follow them, nor did Qin Anlin. The two of them stayed and had a fight. She is now my wife. Qin Anlin's voice was a little mocking. Tang Yu, she has lost her memory. If you stimulate her, it will only make her more painful. Tang Yu's pupils suddenly contracted, and he stared at Qin Anlin. In the end, he still left. So what if she had lost her memory? Next, Qin Anlin couldn't care less about Chi. He had plenty of opportunities. Qin Anlin also got into the car and prepared to go to the company. However, Kam rushed over and stood outside the car window. Her breathing was a little erratic. President Qin, we have to go to H City. Qin Anlin's fingers clenched the steering wheel. If he wasn't wrong, H City. Yi Liangqiu was living in H City now. He narrowed his eyes at Kam. Kam didn't hesitate at all. Yi Liangqiu's child is 7 years old. He is President Qin's child. Qin Anlin's eyes narrowed even more. He looked at Kam and said gloomily, Did she tell you? He continued, The child's name is Yi Muyun. He has Rh-negative blood. Chapter 13-14. At this point, Qin Anlin had a rough idea of what had happened. He opened the car door, got out of the car, and walked quickly towards the airport. As he walked, he said, Prepare the private plane to H City. Kam was stunned for a moment before he followed him. At this moment, Qin Anlin's phone rang. It was old Zhang, and he sounded very anxious. Young master, Miss Pei is missing. Qin Anlin pursed his lips and clenched his fingers. He looked at Kam and said, Go down and find her. Send her back to my apartment. Kam nodded and quickly got off the plane. However, as soon as Qin Anlin's plane flew away, Kam was stopped by Meng Qingqing. Meng Qingqing leaned against the front of a black Bentley and looked at Kam with a faint smile. Are you sure you want to look for her? Kam was stunned and looked at Meng Qingqing. Meng Qingqing stood up and walked towards Kam. You should know that Qin Anlin is playing with fire. Pei Chi doesn't belong to him. Kam, I believe you're a smart person. You know which side to stand on. After saying that, he handed over a check, which was enough for Kam to live a good life without working for the rest of his life. Kam looked down for a while and said in a low voice, Mr. Tang is giving me too much. Meng Qingqing said solemnly, In Mr. Tang's heart, Pei Chi is priceless. He paused for a moment. Kam, do you really think that Qin Anlin loves Pei Chi? If it was love, he wouldn't have left B City. He would have gone to H City. Kam didn't say anything. Meng Qingqing patted him on the shoulder and said, This isn't betrayal. This is to help President Qin find himself. After saying that, Meng Qingqing left. Kam stood there for a long time. He knew that Pei Chi was probably with Tang Yu right now. Looking at the check, she thought about how President Qin and Pei Chi had not had a breakthrough in their relationship for 2 years. Meng Qingqing was right. This was not a betrayal. It was for the good of President Qin. When Meng Qingqing got into the car and saw Kam standing there, his lips curved into a slight smile. He picked up his phone and looked at the number on it. His gaze turned gentle. It's all settled. Yunji today, he kissed her. But he wasn't sure about his feelings for her. so it could be considered as rejection. However, when he received her call, the night was not so lonely. Qin Amlin's private plane arrived at City H at 2:00 in the night. He rushed to the presidential suite on the top floor of the hotel where Yi Lianxiu lived. Late at night, Yi Muyun had already fallen asleep. There was only a dim yellow light in the suite. Yi Lianxiu came to open the door. The moment the door opened, both their gazes froze. He was travel-worn, while she was wearing a snow-white bathrobe. Her long hair was slightly wet and scattered behind her back like seaweed. Her beauty had always been soul-stirring on the screen, but at this moment, she was calm, like an ordinary wife waiting for her husband to return late. Qin Amlin looked at her for a long time, then walked in. "Where is he?" He tried to sound calm, but he was actually not calm. Yi Lianxiu walked towards the bedroom, and Qin Amlin followed behind. Then, he saw Yi Muyun, who looked like an angel. He was so cute, lying there so fragile. His face was a little pale, as if he had been sick for a long time. Yi Lianxiu handed a document to Qin Amlin. He didn't look at it immediately, but walked over and sat next to Yi Muyun. He raised his hand, hesitated for a moment, and finally placed it on his soft hair. Qin Amlin closed his eyes. This was his son. Chapter 13:15. Qin Amlin closed his eyes. This was his son, Qin Amlin's son. He let out a long breath and said in a suppressed voice, "Yi Lianxiu, you really deserve to die." She didn't make a sound. His fingers gently stroked his son's face. "He's had a blood transfusion?" Yi Lianxiu nodded. "Yes, but I don't know when the next time will be. There isn't enough Rh-negative blood in the blood bank. So, I'm taking on the role of the blood bank, right?" Qin Amlin's voice was a little hoarse. "If I don't need blood, I won't know of his existence for the rest of my life, right?" "Yes," she said bluntly, deliberately provoking him. Qin Amlin didn't move. After a long time, his voice was very soft. "Yi Lianxiu, you really dare to say that? President Qin doesn't like to be lied to." She leaned against the door and looked at him. His fingers gently touched little Mu Yun's slightly cold face and closed his eyes. "Why didn't you say so earlier?" This time, she didn't answer. "Why did you look for me this time?" He continued to ask. Then he stood up and walked slowly to her. Her back was against the door. He raised his hand gently and pinched her cheek with one hand. "Yi Lianxiu, what are you thinking about?" He lowered his head and looked into her eyes. His eyes were burning. She didn't retreat. She looked into his eyes and sneered. "Qin Amlin, what am I thinking about? Don't you know? Don't play tricks with me." He pinched her face tightly and used half of his strength. Her eyes were watery, but she stubbornly didn't say a word. She just looked up and stared at him. "If you think I'm hateful and have ulterior motives, Qin Amlin, you can leave immediately," she said coldly. "I used up all my tricks a few years ago. Now, I don't think it's necessary to play tricks on President Qin. You don't care anymore, so you don't want to play anymore, right?" He suddenly let go of her face and pursed his lips. At that moment, he noticed an exquisite platinum ring hanging from her collarbone. Strange, he was sure he had never seen it before. Qin Amlin narrowed his eyes and looked at Yi Lianxiu. "Who sent this? It has nothing to do with President Qin." She tried to avoid him, but he grabbed her shoulder with one hand and took the ring with the other. He tore it off. The excessive force left a long red mark on her neck, and her skin was a little broken. The ring fell into his palm. He looked at it carefully and lowered his gaze to look at her. "Is it from Lin Xingyuan?" In the past 2 years, although he had not had much contact with her, he knew that she had always been with Lin Xingyuan. And now that he had just returned to B City, she found out. He couldn't help but suspect that she was playing tricks. Yi Lianxiu wanted to take it back, but she couldn't. He pressed her shoulder with one hand and pinned her firmly to the door. He played with the ring with the other hand and said coldly, "Do you love him?" When he thought about how this damned woman had brought his child to live with Lin Xingyuan, and how she had allowed that man to hug her, a hint of anger rose in his heart. He stared at her eyes, not letting go of any expression on her face. It has nothing to do with President Qin. Yuliancio looked down and smiled. President Qin can't be delusional and think that I want to tie you up, right? You don't? You let go of her a little. She wanted to straighten up, but he pressed her down again. Chapter 13:16. Yuliancio, you'd better not move. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that Mu Yun won't see what he shouldn't see. He warned her in a low voice, then took her hand and walked out to the living room. The door to the guest bedroom was closed. Adults shouldn't let a child hear an argument. She was forcefully thrown to the sofa, like a piece of rag. In this world, he was the only one who dared to treat her like this. Yuliancio had just gotten up, but she was pushed back down again. He pressed her body with one leg, not letting her move. Qin Amlin, are you crazy? Her long hair spread out hopelessly, but she was still breathtakingly beautiful even without makeup. He pinched her chin with his fingers. You're so beautiful even when you're angry. Is he obsessed with you? His voice was extremely hoarse as he spoke, and his fingers touched her red lips. She had changed a lot from the Yuliancio of 5 or 6 years ago. Compared to the young and inexperienced Yuliancio of the past, she was now exuding the aura of a mature woman. Her entire body made men crazy, especially when she was 172 centimeters tall, and when she rolled up her bathrobe, her legs were straight and fair, making one wonder had she once coiled her legs around Lin Xingyuan's waist. Had she also enjoyed Lin Xingyuan's body? Qin Amlin's eyes seemed to be on fire. He was angry and jealous. Yes. Yuliancio raised her chin and smiled instead of getting angry. She smiled delicately and put her slender arms around his neck. Qin Amlin, Xingyuan likes my body. What about you? There was a storm in his eyes. Do you like him? Before she could say anything, he had already lowered his body and pressed himself against her, letting her feel his eagerness. His face was very close to hers, and his gaze was deep. He has me okay? Can he also make you feel pain and happiness like that? I don't remember. Yuliancio couldn't struggle. She felt too embarrassed, so she turned her face to the side. Qin Amlin moved forward again. Can you remember some of it like this? Her eyes widened. She couldn't believe that he would do such a thing to her. He actually did such a shameful thing to her through her clothes. As they rubbed against each other, her bathrobe was completely undone. His coat was thrown aside, and his belt was hanging around his waist in a mess. Qin Amlin, are you crazy? She avoided his kiss and resisted with all her might. However, compared to his strength, she was so fragile and soft. The difference in strength between a man and a woman was very clear at this moment. He pressed her down like a hot knife through butter, and he looked down at her from above while his gaze carried a wisp of coldness. Yuliancio, why do you have to be like this? You already have a child, so it's no longer fun to play this kind of game of trying to refuse too much. He leaned in to continue the kiss. A slap landed on his face. Yuliancio gasped and glared at him. Qin Amlin, I love Xingyuan. His gaze became somewhat aghast. She said that she loved Lin Xingyuan. Yes, I love him. She looked straight at him. Does your pride allow you to want such a woman? Qin Amlin, I'm no longer the Yuliancio of the past. I won't wait for you to look back at me like a fool. I won't have any hope. She said coldly. Now, I've fallen in love with someone else. He maintained his position for a while before slowly releasing her. Chapter 13:17. His face was still burning hot, but he didn't care. He narrowed his eyes and looked at her. Yuliancio, you're really good. Same to you. Compared to President Qin, I think I'm loyal enough. She laughed coldly. He looked at her. I hope your love for Lin Xingyuan will continue. It's none of President Qin's business. No matter who I love, I won't love you like a fool anymore. She raised her chin, but Qin Amlin caught the meaning in her words. She loved him? Did she give birth to Mu Yun because of love? But Qin Amlin didn't ask. If he did, everything would be different. At this moment, a timid voice came from the door. "Mom!" Yi Lianxiu turned her head and saw her son standing at the door. She froze, and Qin Anlin moved very quickly. He quickly blocked Yi Lianxiu's body and said in a low voice, "Button up your clothes." Damn it, her bathrobe had fallen apart. Mu Yun had seen everything that should and shouldn't be seen. Yi Lianxiu bit her lip and quickly buttoned up her clothes. Qin Anlin waved and called Mu Yun over. The little boy was a little hesitant, but he still walked over slowly. The little boy was wearing snow-white pajamas. It was the one-piece kind, and there was a little tail at the back. He looked very cute. Qin Anlin's cold heart softened. He looked at the little boy and reached out to pull him into his arms. "I'm Daddy." This child was very good-looking. He had taken on the good points of him and Yi Minxiu. He gently rubbed his soft hair. He finally knew why he was called Mu Yun. His hair really looked like soft clouds. Mu Yun shyly threw herself into his father's arms, resting her little face on his shoulder. She said softly, "Daddy, you don't like Mommy, do you?" Qin Anlin's body stiffened, but he quickly denied it. How could that be? Daddy didn't even hug Mommy, and he even bullied her. Mu Yun's voice was very soft, and there was also a hint of frustration in it. Qin Anlin tilted his head and glanced at Yi Lianglai. He pulled her over with one hand and made her sit on his lap. It was rare for him to be so tall, so the 172 kilograms Yi Lianxiu sitting on his lap didn't look out of place. "Look, Daddy and Mommy have a good relationship." He smiled, wanted to make his son's broken childhood a little happier. He was willing to do something to make Mu Yun happy. Mu Yun's little face turned red because he had never seen such a scene before. It wasn't just him. Even Yi Lianxiu wasn't used to it. She turned her body sideways and said in a low voice, "Qin Anlin, what are you doing? Do you really want to do something with me in front of your son?" His voice was also very low, and there was a hint of mockery in it. "I'd love to. Have you been hungry for so long that you can't be choosy?" She gritted her teeth. Unexpectedly, he actually answered her, and he said very seriously and seriously, "More than 2 years. Why, Miss Yi? Do you want to be a good person and satisfy me just once?" He was shameless and shameless. She subconsciously hit him. He didn't dodge, and in the end, she slapped his face. "Mu Yun, do you see that? It's your mother who is bullying me." Qin Anlin's tone was indifferent, as if it wasn't a slap on his face, but a candied date. Mu Yun was stunned. Mommy was so fierce. Daddy seemed to be a big shot, and Mommy could hit him whenever she wanted. Chapter 13:18. Qin Anlin chuckled and said calmly, "Mu Yun, Mommy is a woman, so Daddy will give in to her." Yi Muyan glanced at his mother's bathrobe and didn't say anything. Yi Lianxiu picked up her son and said gently and calmly, "Mu Yun, why don't you go back to sleep? Mommy will carry you to bed." She carried a 7-year-old child easily. Qin Anlin looked at her quietly and didn't say anything. He just took little Mu Yun and said, "Let me carry him." So, little Mu Yun was carried by his father for the first time. His little face was slightly red because of shyness and excitement. He lay on Qin Anlin's shoulder and looked obedient. Yi Lianxiu's hands were empty. She looked at the father and son in front of her in a daze. It seemed that Qin Anlin had quickly accepted Mu Yun's existence. Mu Yun was the same. He didn't have the slightest resistance to this father, who suddenly appeared. It seemed that she was the only one who couldn't accept it. She was against Qin Anlin's appearance from the bottom of her heart. She pursed her lips and followed him in. Qin Anlin carried little Mu Yun to the bed and covered the little boy with the quilt. He said gently, "Sleep early. Daddy, it's almost dawn." There was a touch of reluctance in little Mu Yun's eyes. "Daddy, I don't want to sleep. I'm afraid that when I wake up, Daddy will be gone." Qin Anlin felt a little sad when he heard that. He put his face close to little Mu Yun's and said in a low voice, "It won't happen again. I can guarantee that our Mu Yun will see Daddy every day when he wakes up." "What about Mommy?" Little Mu Yun tugged at his sleeve and asked in a low voice. Qin Anlin was stunned and didn't know how to answer him for a moment. The 7-year-old boy looked at him longingly. It was hard for him to refuse, so he forced a smile. Of course, there's also Mom. Will you get married? Little Mu Yin looked very cautious. Not only Qin Anlin, but also Yi Liangxiu couldn't handle such a problem. They had never intended to be together in the first place. Amidst the silence, little Mu Yun's face clearly showed that she was hurt. He looked at his father, then at his mother. He pursed his lips and buried his face in the pillow. He was obviously angry. Qin Amlin looked at Yi Liangxiu. The look in his eyes said, "You're angry just like that? How do you usually educate them?" Yi Liangxiu stared back at him. The look in his eyes said, "I inherited your genes." Qin Amlin didn't argue with her. He reached out and touched little Mu Yun's hair. He answered ambiguously, "Daddy and Mommy need to cultivate their relationship. Marriage isn't a child's play." Yi Liangxiu stood at the side and said mockingly, "Yes, marriage isn't a child's play." He glared at her for a while before he continued to coax little Mu Yun to sleep. He couldn't believe that he accepted this child so easily. He even forgot about Chi-Chi's existence at this moment. Little Mu Yun looked up and pursed his pretty lips. He hesitated for a moment before asking, "Then will Daddy and Mommy sleep together at night?" "Well, yes." Qin Amlin smiled calmly. "Then we'll go to sleep." Yi Liangxiu was stunned when he said that. What was he saying? Sleep together? How could that be? However, Qin Amlin had already given Mu Yun a goodnight kiss and pulled her out of the room. Chapter 13:19. He had already taken off his belt and was unbuttoning his shirt one by one. Then, he threw the belt and shirt at the end of the bed. Yi Liangxiu looked at him for a long time, and he just stood there looking at her. "Yi Liangxiu, didn't you spend so much effort to call me over for me to do this?" She pursed her lips and suddenly hugged his shirt. She stuffed it into his arms and said softly, "Get lost." Qin Amlin pursed his lips and smiled faintly. "Are you sure?" She didn't speak, and her expression was slightly cold. He put on his clothes slowly and neatly. It seemed that he was going to leave. Yi Liangxiu stopped him and sounded a little angry. "Qin Amlin, I thought you wanted me to leave." His voice was a little soft, but there was an indescribable force in it. She pursed her lips and said with difficulty, "I think, for the sake of Mu Yun, let's call a truce. If I say, for the sake of Mu Yun, I want, will you agree?" He said faintly without turning his head, so she couldn't see his expression. Yi Liangxiu was stunned for a moment. "Don't forget, you're married." "Why? You want to give your body to Lin Xingyuan?" he asked mockingly. Yi Liangxiu didn't reply. It was unwise to say anything at this moment. The more she didn't speak, the angrier he got. He didn't know what he was angry about. He pursed his lips and said coldly, "Come here and hug me." "What?" Yi Liangxiu was surprised. She looked up at his back and couldn't believe what she had heard. "You didn't hear it wrong. Come here and hug me. Make love with me." His voice was even colder. "Yi Liangxiu, this is my condition." With that, he turned his head slowly and looked at her. Her face was pale, and he looked straight into her eyes as if he was looking for something. They looked at each other for a long time. Finally, she walked towards him slowly. She put her hand on his belt and gently unbuckled it. Qin Anlin didn't move. He only looked down at her from above, watching her do such a subservient thing. In his memory, she wasn't used to doing this, but she still did it. His Adam's apple bobbed uncontrollably as her fingers lightly unbuttoned his shirt. As he said, he hadn't touched a woman for over 2 years. Her body had always been what he desired. It was impossible for him not to be aroused. But a powerful big palm still caught her hand. Qin Anlin's eyes were burning. "Yi Liangxiu, what on earth do you want that you are willing to be so wronged?" He raised her hand and stared at her. "Is this the title of Mrs. Qin?" Her slender white hand was held by him. She did not struggle and only looked up at him. "It's your blood." Qin Amlin narrowed his eyes and pushed her away after a long time. "It better be like this." He went straight into the bathroom, and in a moment she heard the water running. He was taking a shower. Yi Liangxiu remembered that he didn't have a change of clothes, so she found a bathrobe in the closet and walked to the bathroom door. She wanted to call him, but then she heard some strange noises. That was him doing that. She wanted to retreat, but at this moment, the bathroom door was suddenly opened. Her arm was caught, and she fell into a steamy chest. His face was stuck to the water vapor, but he could still feel the warmth. Yuliancio looked up and was sucked in by two hot lips. Chapter 13:20. Her body was folded uncomfortably in his arms, and she couldn't move. Yi Lianxiu struggled angrily. Qin Anlin, what are you doing? He kissed her. No matter where her head was, he could still stick to her lips. And what was worse was that he was kissing her while finishing what he hadn't finished just now. Everything calmed down. He leaned his face against the side of her neck and panted lightly. His hot breath blew against the side of her neck. It was hot and uncomfortable, and she was afraid. Yi Liangxiu, this is marriage. You need to do this kind of thing at any time. His voice was low in her ears. Are you sure? You're so hungry that you can't be choosy. She leaned her back against the cold wall and gritted her teeth. But only she herself knew that her heart was trembling and her legs were weak. She would also be seduced by him, and she would also be moved and hurt. Yi Lianxiu, this isn't fun. He bit her neck. We can still be like before, right? Her body turned cold, and her voice was even colder. You mean, we can give Mu Yun a relatively happy childhood? His fingers stroked her face gently. With less scheming, Mu Yun will be much happier. Her eyes fell on his face and didn't move away. An unhappy marriage can't give him a complete family. I think you know that better than anyone else. He looked at her with narrowed eyes. Is your marriage with Pei Chi-Chi happy? She suddenly laughed and leaned her head against the wall. He stared at her little face for a long time before he said softly, I like her. Yi Lianxiu was stunned. Like her? Yes, you can give up a lot of things if you like someone. She chuckled. Qin Amlin, I'll fulfill your wish. She turned around. Just like you said, I'll give Mu Yun a relatively happy childhood. He looked at her suspiciously. Yi Lianxiu, this doesn't seem like you. Then what do I have to do to be like me? She smiled coldly. Force you to divorce? He did not reply. Qin Amlin, I don't think we want to have anything to do with each other, so just put on a good show in front of Mu Yun. She seemed to be at the end of her patience. At this moment, Qin Amlin felt a kind of emptiness, an indescribable emptiness. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the woman in front of him. He could not see through her. He couldn't tell what she really wanted. It was definitely not Mu Yun's happiness. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but say coldly, I will. I hope you will too. Yi Liangxiu pulled open the bathroom door and walked out. Also, I hope what happened today will never happen again. I promise there will be more, he said shamelessly. Yi Liangxiu bit her lip. Qin Amlin, you're shameless. He just looked at her. At that moment, they suddenly thought of the past. They thought of the short 2 to 3 months they had lived together. At that time, they were the closest and most unfamiliar people in the world. He allowed her to walk into his world, but not into his heart. Yi Liangxiu hated this feeling. She held her head with her hand and left. Qin Amlin did not pull her. He looked in the direction where she left with an unfathomable gaze. He could feel that the way she treated him was really different from before. In her eyes, he could not see the light from before. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.